lack of generating capacity, aging infrastructure and labour relations problems. To say it's been a difficult year for Eskom would be an understatement. There have been accusations of cadre deployment as confusion reigns over where responsibility for the power crisis lies. Let's get the views now of former Eskom CEO Jacob Maroga, who's with us here in studio. Mr. Maroga, thank you very much for your time here on all angles and on eNCA, and thank you for coming in. Now, of course, you've seen all the troubles that Eskom has been in. It seems to us that things are getting worse than getting better. And I remember about 7 years ago, you were at the annual Power, Electricity Africa Summit or conference. And there's something that you said then when there were, already we were in load shedding, and there were people who were unions who were asking for the then CEO and other executive members to resign. And I just want to quote you. In terms of what you said. You said, normally, sometimes out of a crisis emerges many opportunities. It's not all doom and gloom. It's actually rethinking our energy system, strategy, future and governance. So it may be a phase of reflection and re-strategizing for South Africa. Do you still believe this? It's 7 years later. It looks worse. Well,
sometimes things that you say come back to bite you. But I still believe so. I still believe that there is an opportunity to rethink how we govern, to rethink how we manage, to rethink the energy mix, to rethink how we bring back the capacity within Eskom that is now not operational. So yes, still a crisis. It looks like it's going to be a deep crisis, but of course, we need to be positive that we will emerge on the other side of the crisis.
Now, of course, your history with Eskom is quite long. It was between 1995 and 2007,
yes.
or 9 rather, when you
yes.
Resigned as CEO. You served as CEO for 2 years.
Yes.
So you were there on that year when we first started hearing about load shedding and this term load shedding back in 2008. There's been a lot of articles and a lot of experts who say they warned government. They had said, build new power stations, maintain, etc. Was that happening at that time, or was government and Eskom oblivious to what we'd face today?
There's a myth that load shedding started in 2008. In fact, when you read the history of Eskom, there's been power system issues, load shedding. I mean, I know, for instance, in the Cape, we had a partial blackdown of the Cape in 2004 because of Quebec. So load shedding didn't start in 2008. And in fact, 2009, we stopped it. And I think it came back around 2014.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to give that context. In terms of the capacity challenges, people, I think blame government correctly, but in some cases not correctly. In 1998, government wrote a white paper to restructure the entire power sector. And part of it was to say we need new capital in the power sector. We need IPPs in the power sector. They can bring new capital, new skills, and we as government and as Eskom don't have to provide that money. And it was the right call. But the IPPs did not come for many reasons. And one of the reasons is that our price was too low for IPPs to invest. So when the price of electricity is too low, it's good for the customers, but it's not good for the investors because they don't get the returns. So when they compare with international norms, we were too cheap for them to invest. So then government said, Eskom, go ahead and build. Then Midoubi, Kusile, and Ingula came out of that.
And I mean, now we're hearing talks of the independent power producers only now. In reality, if Eskom is only speaking to IPPs now and there's interest now, how long do you think it's going to take for us to actually get that alternative power?
Look, the reality is that IPPs, renewable IPPs, are not going to solve this current problem. Okay. The load shedding is not going to stop, even if you put 20,000 megawatts of renewable energy today. The reason for that is that renewable energy is what is called intermittent. What you have in Eskom mostly is baseload power, which means, and dispatchable power, which means Eskom is in control to switch on, to switch off. With renewable, it depends on the weather. Now, there are lessons in the most advanced economy in the world, Germany, which has spent 8.5 trillion rand over 20 years in doubling its capacity with renewables. But 12% of the baseload disappeared because of Putin's war in Ukraine, and Germany went running back to switch more coal. Because you cannot run a modern economy currently on renewable alone. technology will evolve, storage, battery storage will come, which will allow much more flexibility with renewable. But currently, renewable alone is not going to solve the problem. It's good, reduce emissions. It's good because the cost has come down, but it's not going to solve the current problem.
So what's going to solve our problem?
There's 15,000 megawatts in Eskom. You see, Eskom's got more than enough capacity.
Really?
When I left at Eskom, we had 40,000 megawatts. Today, Eskom has got 46,000 megawatts. There's around 6,000 megawatts of renewable. The demand of energy is lower than in 2009. So there's enough capacity in the Eskom and the South African system. What is the problem? The performance of the current fleet. 40% of it is not operational for various reasons, maintenance, operations. That's the focus. If you want to solve the current load shedding, you focus on bringing back or making sure there is consistent performance of the current generation plant. And that doesn't have to take 24 months. It can be done.
All right. So there was a talk at some point after Midoubi was finally completed, Gusile, etc. And there was talk that there was issues around the building of those power stations, mistakes were made, etc. I mean, so we still have to fix what we've already spent money on.
Sure. Those are facts. I think Midoubi, should have run. I mean, been completed a long time ago. There's still some problem. And one unit, I think, is exploded. Gusile, the same. There've been problem with the construction of those power stations. Problems in constructions of large engineering projects happens across the world, right? Some worse than what we've seen, but we have had a fair share of that, and it has, I think, made the problem worse. So, yeah, I think that's what it is.
So when you say load shedding is going to be a part of our lives for a long time, are you saying that this is going to be South Africa for many, many years?
It doesn't have to be. There is a solution. The reason we're in load shedding is because on average 15,000 of available capacity is broken down. Fix it. You remove load shedding. We have stage 6. Stage 6 means we are short of 6,000 megawatts. What is broken is 15,000 megawatts. There's enough in that 15,000 megawatts to avoid all load shedding. The issue is going to be, what would it take to fix that? I've had people talk about the age of the fleet. There are old stations in Eskom, but most of the Eskom fleet is within operational age. These things can go up to 60 years. In the end, it's a matter of economics, matter of efficiency, and matter of choice. So I think this age issue, I think, we shouldn't listen to it. The issue, we need to understand why are we consistently having 15,000 megawatts not operational, and what needs to happen to fix that? And if we do that, we remove load shedding.
Yeah. Well, I hope they do find that solution. But I want to speak to you about the illegal strike, that we saw happening. It's an essential service. Eskom offers the country essential services, and obviously that is why we term it illegal. You were with Eskom between 1995 and 2009. At some point, you were the distribution technology manager, so you were an ordinary worker just like them. Seeing this happen now also, does it perhaps show us in South Africa that things are really boiling over? People are getting more and more angered to a point where even people who signed to say, I offer an essential service and will not embark on such, will do it anyway now?
Look, I think we should be very careful to apportion blame when there's a strike.
Yeah.
There are dynamics. So I don't have the details to say, people were wrong. But just what we hear, things were boiling over a period of time, no salary increases. I think as Eskom workers, they bear the brunt of what is happening. They live in communities. They have to be part of society. So, and also I've heard that, certain benefits were just taken unilaterally. So there may be issues on both sides that need to be dealt with. It's unfortunate that it had to happen the way it did. But I don't think we should also just blame workers for the current load shedding.
We were already on stage 4.
We were already on stage 4, and we don't know whether it's really workers that caused stage 6. Maybe
it was just a convenient.
They impacted it. So I think I don't want to to say, and I think it's also part of management to manage your employees such that they don't actually go to that extra mile. So you cannot also say it's the workers. Part of leadership is also to deal with worker issues, to listen, to deal with their issues so that it doesn't go to the extreme.
To that extent, yeah. I want to discuss another topic, but before I do that, I wanted to speak to you about Mpumalanga. Eskom has obviously been having a lot of press briefings lately because of the fact that they needed to update the nation about the power challenges or the electricity challenges. And at some point, the executive, including Andre de Ruyter and Jan Oberholzer, were basically sounding like a management that has given up on Mpumalanga in terms of what they deem corruption happening at those power stations, criminality happening at those power stations, etc., and how they need police to step in. Has Mpumalanga always been a problem in terms of what they allege to be corruption and people not wanting to work, etc.?
Not to my experience. I think they talked about certain power stations in Mpumalanga. A lot of power stations in Eskom are actually in Mpumalanga.
Yes.
There are certain power stations apparently where they found spares, stolen, deliberate sabotage of the system and the operations. It has not been a problem. I mean, we've been running this power system based on most of the power stations in Mpumalanga. We have not had this kind of problems. They may be new. I'm not familiar.
I have to ask you an uncomfortable question.
Sure.
And I'm going to ask you if you could please answer. How would you rate the current Eskom executive?
It's an unfair question. I think I think it's an unfair question to actually individualize.
Okay.
But let me say this, and I think in general, Emirates is a state-owned airline in Dubai, world class. If you've traveled Emirates, if you've been to Dubai, and I'm sure for them to be world class, they said we want the best in the world that can run this airline. Eskom is the 10th largest utility in the world, right? And if you say you want to stay there in terms of not only size, but in terms of respect amongst your peers, you need to ask yourself, do I have both in the board, in the executives, and right across the management, do I have that team to take me there? Those are the questions that you need to ask. But rating this or that, it's really, I don't want to,
I think for many South Africans, because we're feeling despondent, we'd probably rate this current executive as the worst, because they even say it themselves that this is the worst experience of load shedding that we've had in the history of the country. Now, earlier you alluded, Mr. Maroga, to changing governance. I want to bring in the topic of cadre deployment. At parastatals or any other company that is supposed to offer services to the country on behalf of the state. During your tenure, whether as CEO or previous executive positions, was that a problem at Eskom? Is that part of the problem in terms of what we're dealing with today and Eskom being mentioned so many times in state capture?
Well, I think the issue of state cadre deployment is a political, I think, and the political principle can talk to it. I went to Eskom, I got an interview, came into Eskom, and I rose through the rank. I was chief executive. I mean, I think there were about 200 candidates. Some of them were internal, and I emerged as a CEO. I have no information that I was deployed as a cadre, because by the time I was the CEO, I was there for more than 12 years and had executive roles in transmission, executive roles in distribution. Now, the issue, I think, let's talk. I mean, let's remove the term cadre deployment and just talk. What is the concept? I think the concept is people being appointed in state-owned enterprises, people who are not competent, but are employed for political reasons.
Yeah.
That's nonsense. It should stop, right? Obviously, whichever way you call it. If you've got critical institution of state, even some of them which are not necessarily fully state, we need to get the best people in there. Of course, being mindful of affirmative action, being mindful of gender empowerment. Those should be the criteria, but it shouldn't be, you're a political toy of somebody or a political agent of somebody. I mean, that's obviously, the thing that must stop. Now, whether ruling parties in their wisdom believe they need to sit down and say, what capacity do you need to deploy anyway? I think it's their prerogative, whether they call it cadre deployment. But I don't think, I think every party has, when it governs, it has a process to say there are certain people we want to encourage because they've got the capacity. That may be the case. But the concept of appointing people who don't have the technical skill purely because of political connection, that is nonsense.
And for state parastatals to work, you also need the state to work and administrators of policy to also have an understanding and actually have the ability to implement policy, right? So would you say that there was any point at all while you were at Eskom or any other time looking from the sidelines after resigning that you felt that this particular minister, whether of energy or of state utilities, should not be there?
In terms of competence?
Yes.
Look, I think it's not my duty to rate ministers. I think it's the presidents that appoint ministers. But I think you can look across the cabinet and say whether they strengths. But let me make this one point. I think and make comparisons.
Yeah.
In certain countries, when you're going to meet the Minister of Finance, that Minister of Finance is likely to have run banks before he becomes Minister of Finance. If the minister is the Minister of Energy, he may have run utilities before he becomes the Minister of Energy. It doesn't happen that way in this country, which is a weakness. But there's a history to it, obviously, because of 1994. So those dynamics, I think, over time, those are the kind of things that will assist. When we talk to a minister in a particular portfolio, that minister has command of the entire sector in terms of respect, technical knowledge, and insight. So when you don't have that, obviously, it creates problems.
Yeah, exactly. Just my last question to you, Mr. Maroga. Thank you very much for this conversation. South Africans have been asking themselves, in terms of administration and ministerial positions, who is to blame? Is it Minister Gwede Mantashe or is it Minister Pravin Gordhan? A lot of people are saying, why aren't these ministers calling a press briefing like the president used to do every time there were more COVID deaths or whatever? He used to address the nation. This is a crisis in our country, and we expect even the ministers, who are supposed to also be held account along with the Eskom executive, to also come in and tell us what they're doing on the administrative level. So, just help South Africans understand, when we say accountability, it's both these, right? These departments, but who more?
Look, I don't want to go into personal, this one, this more, this. Eskom is a state-owned enterprise.
Yeah.
The collective of government must take responsibility.
Yes.
But this, for me, this is what is broken in terms of currently. And this is the thing that must be fixed. The current generation fleet is operating below par. And for us to get out of load shedding, you need to reduce that 15,000 megawatts that is permanently out of service and run it consistently. Improve what is called energy availability factor from the current mid-50s to above 70. It used to be in the 90s, 80s, 90s. When it comes to the 60s, it takes out a lot of capacity out of the system. That is the cost. Now, whoever is to blame, whoever can sort that out, that's where we should focus.
All right. Well, thank you very much for speaking to us. I really do hope that the entire team of Eskom and the ministers and governments responsible were listening to our interview. Thank you for coming to eNCA. That was the former CEO of Eskom, Dr. Jacob Maroga, speaking to us there.